Hello, thank you for joining us for this special discussion to celebrate International Women's Day. My name's Caroline Drake. I'm the Chief People Officer at Zellis, which is a leading payroll and HR solutions company in the UK and Ireland. I'm joined today by two incredible women to discuss the ongoing challenges and opportunities to increase the representation and contribution of women at both board and senior leadership roles across all organisations. So welcome to both Sarah and Denise. I'll start, Denise, with you. Denise Wilson OBE and Chief Executive of FTSE Women Leaders Review, which has just released last month. Please, could you take a couple of moments just to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Caroline, for inviting me to speak today. I'm Denise Wilson, Chief Executive of the FTSE Women Leaders Review, the third and successor phase to the Hampton-Alexander Review and the Davies Review, which is aimed at getting more women onto FTSE 350 boards and into FTSE 350 leadership teams.
Fantastic, thank you, Denise. And we'll talk more about the review in just a moment. But on to my second guest, Sarah Morris, who's operating partner at Bain Capital Private Equity, who focuses on the human capital agenda across all portfolio companies. Hello, Sarah, thank you for joining us. And would you like to introduce yourself and give a bit of background?
So I'm Sarah Morris and I'm operating partner at Bain Capital Private Equity with a focus on human capital. Prior to that, I've spent the last 25 years in public markets in a number of sectors, number of countries around the world. I feel very privileged to have had those experiences, and I'm delighted to be talking to you today about gender equality because I've also spent a significant part of my career working in that space and a proud member of the steering committee of the 30% Club.
Fantastic, thank you, Sarah. Well, welcome to you both. The theme for International Women's Day this year is Break the Bias. And we're encouraging a gender equal world which is free of bias, stereotyping and all forms of discrimination. I think it's fair to say bias is something that impacts everyone, and certainly historically the lower prevalence of women in senior board level roles, executive and senior leadership roles, especially even amongst some of the largest and well-known brands, has been a concern, but we have made progress. And I was really interested to read the review that was published last month, which really sheds light both on the ongoing progress that's being made, but also where there is still much more opportunity for us to improve and for businesses to do better. So I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about that with you both today. As humans, we often focus on the things that aren't going so well or the things that we need to improve. So I thought perhaps we'd start with a positive, and what struck me when I read the review is that whilst there is a lot more for businesses to do, we should pause and celebrate where progress has been made. And if I reference a few of the stats, you know, women representation on boards in the FTSE 100 now at 39.1%, up from 36.2% last year. You know, 48 companies in the FTSE 100 have already reached the new goal of being over 40%, which is fantastic. And the UK sitting in second place, or the UK FTSE 100 sitting in second place internationally. So there is a lot to celebrate. And maybe if I start with you, Denise, what do you think the UK is doing right?
Well, look, you know, we intentionally chose a voluntary regime a decade ago, and there was a clear choice when many other countries in Europe were choosing legislation and quotas. And the UK overwhelmingly voted to continue the comply or explain context within which business works in the UK. And I do think the voluntary framework has worked really well for us. It's business-led, so it talks the language of business, and it requires business to participate fully in it as well, both in terms of, you know, providing data and the structure, and also in terms of what they're doing in the companies themselves. We set realistic but stretching targets right from the very beginning, and each year we've changed and moved that target up, so extending the scope or extending the voluntary target. I think, you know, setting a positive tone, and Sarah will, you know, I'm sure attest to this with the 30% Club and all the work that's gone in there, intentionally sharing best practice, putting a spotlight on those companies that we're doing really well, and just always talking in a positive, can-do way. I think, you know, I think the data has been fundamental. This has been a data-led initiative, and the annual publication of that data, not just by index, but by sector and by individual company, has meant there's almost no place where a company can go to hide. So the progress that companies are making is very visible, and those that are doing well and those that are not doing so well. And I think maybe just finally, we never ever doubted the strong overflowing supply of competent, capable women in business today, and the many unfulfilled, underemployed women that were just waiting for their rightful place at the top table. And we talked very positively about that and supported women in their endeavours to get right to the top. And I think that's just, there are many things actually, but I'd say those are some of the key components that have helped progress in the UK so far.
Fantastic, thank you, Denise. And Sarah, from your perspective, are you surprised by the progress that's been made? I'm sure you're restless for more change. How do you think we can take this and progress further?
I'm not surprised because, as Denise said, we've always led with an absolutely unfailing belief that this is possible. I am restless. I think we're all restless for more. I think you'd hear us say things like our work here is not done and won't be done for some time. We'd love to do ourselves out of needing to do this work. I think the men would love to feel like that too. Many of the men we work with are equally ambitious for change. I think we did 2 or 3 things that have been done, and the word I use is relentlessly for the last 10 years. There's many people who have relentlessly focused on this, whether that's with shareholders and investors, which have been a really important part of the pressure in the equation, and having been in public companies for a number of years, those are the conversations that have really helped us to nudge companies along. Through to the leaders. So we've engaged with our leaders right across the big and the small companies, and really, as Denise said, we've always taken the perspective that we don't shame people, we don't name and shame. We want to learn what's working, we want to share what's working, and then we quietly, behind closed doors, have conversations with those who feel for whatever reason that perhaps it doesn't apply to them, and there are still some of those out there, believe it or not. And then I think the third thing I've really noticed is it's a tipping point effect. We know that there's quite a lot of data to support the tipping point now, and of course as more women are in these roles, other women are able to look around and look up and see them as role models and believe that it's possible for them. And of course we know that without that it becomes even more intimidating, an idea that you might step into a new career path or step up a level. So I think as it's a bit like rolling a stone down a hill. As we've done that, it's gained more and more traction and attracted more and more who believe it's possible. And of course we could talk about bias all day, but every time you see a brilliant woman succeeding, it's harder for anybody to have bias against them being able to do those roles.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whilst there's a lot to celebrate, it's somewhat surprising that we haven't seen similar in executive level roles and broader senior leadership roles. And particularly I was a bit surprised that CEOs, finance directors really still remain flat. Love to hear your comments there. Perhaps let's start with Sarah.
I think to really consider why we are where we are with that, you have to look at talent and succession pipelines, which you yourself in your role you've been doing for many years. And if you were to examine the succession pipelines and the talent pipelines for those particular roles, executive level, they would not be balanced. I would take a bet in many organizations. And I think because of that, when you then come to make a choice into that role, if you don't start from a balanced place, and if you don't start from a diverse shortlist, it's obviously very difficult to end up with any form of diverse candidate. Much more work has to be done on that pipeline side of things, and we've put a lot of hard work into it in the last few years. And I think the other thing that's quite challenging is that the idea that up until quite recently, we haven't necessarily searched in the right ways. And Denise and I have talked to many people about this. One of our frustrations has been that we needed the search firms to do what they've done in recent years and really think differently about how they target candidates. Because of course, if they're only ever fishing in their same networks, guess what? They're only ever going to find white men. But they've done a really good job. They've come alongside us all in the last few years, and I think we've seen significant shift. And after all, between the big 6 firms, they are responsible for about 70% of those appointments. So it's been incredibly important to see the work they've done and expanding that talent pool.
One of the data points I noticed is that of available roles, I think almost 2 out of every 3 are still going to men in those most senior leadership roles across the FTSE 350. And so you talk there about pipeline search, how we approach things from a talent perspective. Do you think that is shifting now, that almost 2 out of 3. Are we going to see a change there? What more can either search firms or organisations, leaders, investors do to start to change that dynamic? Denise, let maybe hear your thoughts.
Yeah, look, before we go on to the appointment, I just want to pick up on Sarah's comments actually and add something to that. The CEO role is virtually going nowhere. For every woman CEO in the FTSE 350 that's appointed, another one is stepping down due to tenure. So over time, it has been flat, disappointingly flat, and we've seen virtually no progress in a decade. So clearly, one of the recommendations of the next phase is to see a woman in one of the 4 key roles, across the CEO, the FD, the SID, or the chair. And although we're seeing more progress on chairs and SIDs on boards, we're seeing very little progress on FD and CEOs. So that is the next phase of work. Is that surprising? It is the point that everybody picks up at every time we send out a report. There's, oh yes, but we don't have enough women CEOs. And of course we don't have enough women CEOs. And until we start to make really serious inroads in that big role, then this job is not done. And that's why we have another phase, and maybe another phase after that, who knows. But the other thing we need to remember is slightly structural, in that there are only, if we exclude investment trusts, there are only around 250 of these roles of a FTSE 350 CEO in the UK. So there aren't that many. They are the top of the tree, as high as you get in some of our largest organisations in business, and the most powerful and the highest paid. So, and the tenure typically is somewhere around 6, 7, 8 years. So, that is, to my mind, that is the very last hill that we are going to climb. And when we've climbed it, then Sarah and I can be in our rocking chairs by the fire looking back on progress, saying it all went okay, turned out in the end. But, we're not there yet, and we're a long way off there yet. Who knows if the conversation on gender equality is ever done? Look at the centuries of efforts and progress, and women and men, everybody trying to bring about that change, and we're still talking about it now. So look, it is disappointing, but it is where we are, and it's a function of the journey, and I think we need to recognise it, keep working at it, but not be too downbeat on that. So anyway, to answer the question you asked me about the appointment rate, look, I think Sarah's outlined very well what's happened with the search firms, and they're a key and very important community to progress in this area, and have come a very long way over time. So I think that's good, and they're on a journey too. And there are some that are working really hard at this, and some that have not quite woken up to it yet. So there's more work to do there within that community. But so long as we have a appointment rate of 2 out of every 3 available roles going to men, then progress is going to be slow. Progress is going to be much slower than it should be. And we, part of what we need to do is start to bring that up to more parity. And we're a long way off that. I think when this whole journey started on boards, it would have been about, the appointment of men to women would have been about 1 in 10. And now we're talking about 1 in 3. That's clearly not good enough. But until we start to see more women chosen, more women appointed, and I think, the issues go to the very heart of what you're talking about in terms of unpacking bias. Look, this is complex, and there's no one silver bullet. But one of a couple of the big areas, gender stereotyping, unhelpful myths in the workplace about women, about women's ambitions, about men as well, which come from both men and women. We need to really unpack this, because frankly, many of them are untrue and clearly unhelpful. And then I think there's bias in the selection process, and we see that from a very young age, that children are conditioned to men being in certain roles, women being in other roles, and we need to start very early on to break some of that down. And and there's many ways that we can do that. But I think everybody's perceptions, and particularly those that are picking, like if you've got still 2/3 of men in role, which is what we see in our leadership ranks, out of the 21,000 leadership roles that we monitor, still 2/3, or around 70% of those are men. And when you've got male lens on talent and what it looks like, and capabilities and ambition and everything else, and all of their life experience and history and upbringing feeding into that, then I think that's pretty much where we are. So we need to start seeing more, when we start seeing more women coming through into that leadership layer, then I think it will be more self-fulfilling that, you know, men and women are appointed in equal numbers. But we need to change our perceptions of what a leader looks like. A leader doesn't have to be 6'2" and male and, you know, 42-inch chest and silver hair. And I think we have very little concept of a big leader being anything other than the stocky senior male.
Fascinating. As a mum of a 6-year-old daughter who believes she can do anything in the world, and I will encourage and continue to encourage that belief, I look forward to her entering a very different workplace when the time comes. I mean, we've talked a lot, and clearly the review is aimed at the FTSE 350, and you are starting to look at the top 50 private companies as well. I'd love to, driving real change is going to happen when all companies start to take on this ambition, take on this agenda. And I sit here as CPO of a medium-sized organisation, but with big ambitions on diversity, both gender equality and all forms of diversity, yet not necessarily with the resources or the DE&I expertise of a FTSE 100 company. And I would just love to hear what your advice, recommendations would be for us here at Zellis, for me, but also for many other companies like ours, in terms of how we can make an impact and how we can drive progress within our organisations.
Sure.
Should I start with that, Sarah? I think recruiting Sarah is the first step in the process. Very good move. You do need to have people who understand this topic and who have worked it, and not everybody does, yet many people have a great line, know the right words, have some warm words to say about it, but not everybody understands it in the way they should. And you know, if I had a plea, it's that the incredible research and books that are written on this subject are more widely read by our leadership population. I think by and large we have quite an uninformed leadership population in the UK on this subject, are very well intended, are very ambitious, but actually lacking some of the core intellectual academic understanding of this topic, and it's complicated. And so I think that's you know, look, every company if I look at the companies that have made most progress, they are companies that have a plan, they have some staying power, they attack this at every single layer and level in their organization. So this is not a sideshow. Retention is not a sideshow. They pay as much attention, if not more, to retention and promotion of women in their own organization as they do recruitment. And the leader, the voice of the leader, as I said earlier, there is no silver spoon, but the one thing that matters most is when you get, if it's the board, when you get the chair, or if it's the company, when you get the CEO really behind this, really making it personal for them and driving it, then things change very quickly. The same we've noticed that when a CEO or a chair changes, companies can slip back. So, you know, we know that progress is fragile. The other thing that matters hugely is making it count, particularly with senior leaders. So particularly with those that are, you know, they're in high paid, powerful positions in the organization. They've got there by doing a series of things in their own careers well and right, but not necessarily had this in their toolkit. So you have to incentivize the behaviors and the deliveries that you want. And you know, that can happen in many ways. I hear many companies who will say, yeah, we don't have the big bonus pot, we don't have the promotion opportunities, and it's really about all-round reward. So some of those things clearly are helpful if you've got those in your toolkit. If not, you know, there are many other ways that you can shine a positive light on leaders who are doing this well in the organization. You showcase their business unit, you showcase some of their efforts, you know, they're the ones that get taken out to lunch and others hear about that. There are 1,000,001 small ways that you can reward the behaviors and the leaders that are doing this well. And so some of the things that that organisations need to be abreast of. But I just pick up on Sarah's comment earlier, which I thought is so true, and this is hard, and you need staying power. It takes multi-year efforts, and you have to lift the lid on every single people process and intervene in what's going on in the organisation. It's exhausting, and that's why, in part, our plea is to engage and hand the baton to a new generation of leaders, because a decade or so on, we absolutely need that, and we need our senior managers, we need those who are in their late 30s, 40s to be absolutely championing and out in front on this topic, because they're the future.
Caroline, I mean, rewarding it can be,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Go on, Sarah.
I mean, I think this is a big part of why I joined Bain, actually, because I think we have significantly mid-sized companies in most cases where we've got the opportunity to make a huge impact. And I talk about it as 1,000 degrees of change. We really do need, to the relentless point, 1,000 degrees of change to make this work. But I'm going to get practical for a moment, because I think hopefully we've got people listening to this who are in the same situation as you're in, and many of our other colleagues who are running mid-sized companies and thinking, well, what are the things we can actually do? So I guess, call it 4 lessons from things I've learned in the last 25 years doing this work that I think make a big difference. The first one is about bias and language. If you're in a small organisation, the luxury you do have is the ability to affect change in the language you use a lot easier than when you've got 500,000 people. So if you look at the language you use when you're hiring people in job descriptions, if you look at the language you use in performance reviews, is that language inherently biased towards men? It's really interesting to do that exercise, and there's a great organisation called Textio who helps do it, but lots of other ways of doing it. I would look hard at that, because if it is, when you've got 2,000 people, you can get your arms around that and make a real difference to the language. I think the second one is what I always talk about, and many people have heard me talk about this, leveling the playing field for parents. I started it at Aviva. I'm incredibly proud that many other FTSE organisations followed, and we've made a real difference to that, I believe, for society. By leveling the playing field for parents, you enable women to come back to the workforce and men to make the choice they sometimes want to make, which is to have longer time at home for their children. It's not our job to tell them how to do that, but it's our job to give them the choice and the option. And I really believe this is a significant change. And I always say to people, I talk a lot about this, if you're a FTSE 100 and you can afford to level it all for everybody to 12 months or 6 months, fantastic. If you're a small organisation and you can't, do something. Take a step in the direction of levelling the playing field for parents. It's a really, really important signal to both genders. I think that the third thing is expose the leaders to difference. That the most impactful work I've done at boards has been exposing them to what it feels like to be in the minority, and there are a number of ways to do that, which I can talk about another day, but helping them to appreciate what it feels like, because to Denise's point, many of these leaders have not grown up in a world where they were the minority. I think it makes a big difference. And then just the last one, in the interest of time, I think is a bit about cultural symbols. And the most important phrase I offer people to ask themselves if they're not sure how to think about the culture in our organisations is this somewhere I'd be proud for my daughter or my best friend, if it's a female, or my mother to come and spend a few days in? Everything from where they go and have lunch, from the coffee room to the meeting room to the language they hear around them. Is this somewhere I'd be proud for the females I care most about in my life to come and spend a few days in? It's a very interesting question to get leaders to ask themselves.
Great question, and actually not one I had thought about even thinking about myself or talking to our leaders about, but I certainly will after this. I mean, you touched a bit on family policies, and it's a subject that's really close to my heart. I mean, I've got an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 1-year-old, but my husband every time has taken parental leave when I've gone back to work. He works 3 days a week to support families. It does make such a difference if you can get that. If you are a parent, you can get the co-parenting. You really feel like there's more equality, and it's never going to be completely equal. The difference it makes is absolutely huge. And his employer is a fantastic employer, but it's mainly male dominated. And the surprise when he wanted to take the time off, and the shock, and then the request to go part-time was fascinating. But actually what's happened since, about 3 or 4 other people in the organisation have done it, because they've seen somebody take that first step and realised it's an option for them. And actually the company now asking him to speak. So I do think the more we can do to, yes, focus on women, but actually also focus in some cases on men, be that breaking the bias, be that educating, be that family-friendly policies that are truly applicable to all. So fascinating stuff. Look, I could sit and talk to you both all day. I think the review is fantastic. Congratulations, Denise and the team, for the review that you've put together. For those listening, if you haven't already read it, I would really encourage you to look at it, the 2022 FTSE Women Leaders Review. Please download it. We've put a link on here. If you'd like to talk about your own organisation's efforts to encourage more gender equal practices, or in fact any diversity initiatives, please reach out to me. Always happy to discuss. We also did an interesting piece of work on data collection, and I do think data, targets and understanding where you're starting from and setting these stretching but realistic targets is super important. So again, there's a link to that research we did with The Economist if you're interested to read it. But it really just remains for me to say a sincere thank you to both Denise and to Sarah, not just for your time today, but importantly for your significant contributions in progressing gender equality. Thank you both, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you very much.